Hello everyone, I'm Asha Nayaswami and we're going to continue with our progress through this book, Divine Friendship. First though, let's pray together and then we'll have a little chanting. Usually Keshav is here chanting, but he's not here this evening, so my friend Bhavani, who's been helping with all the recording, is going to be leading a couple of chants for us. I'm sure you will enjoy it. So let us first begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, help us to go deep into your presence, to use your words through these letters written some many years ago, to feel your living consciousness in the present moment. We live very much alone in this world and depend upon your inner presence and your guidance. Show us the way step by step, moment by moment, to act, to feel, to think, to be in such a way as to draw closer to thee. Om, peace. Amen. Let's meditate now for just a couple of minutes. Peace. Amen. Well, my friends, here we are. And we're going to start a new section. We finally got out of strong medicine. It was a little too strong medicine for me. I'm very glad to be out of it now. And now we're into yogic techniques. Just sort of see, not too big a section, just curious. Okay, everything is good. So let's see what happens. Everything is interesting. So this first letter is from 1973, and it says, a man who received Kriya initiation from Swamiji asked permission to teach Kriya to a friend. Here Kriyananda addresses both of them. I think it's a he and a she, perhaps a married couple. I have no idea who this is. So Swami's writing a letter to both of them. That's why I think they're a couple. Dear ones, I would be very happy for you to get Kriya initiation. However, you would need the proper preparation for it. So he's talking to the one who doesn't have Kriya, saying, I'm happy for you to be initiated, but you need to be ready. This would include taking the lessons from Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles. In 1973, Swamiji required that everyone who was part of Ananda and everyone who took Kriya also got lessons from SRF. Later on, he took that requirement away. And if possible, though not necessary, also my 14 steps in yoga, now called the art and science of Raja Yoga. So at that time you took the SRF lessons, you didn't have to take the 14 steps. Now you take the art and science of Raja, and the SRF lessons are not required. You would also need to practice the Hong Sa technique of concentration for some period of time and embrace our particular discipline. There are many different paths to God. When one first enters the spiritual path, it is right and proper for him to study many ways and compare. But once he has done the comparing and has decided which path is truly his own, then he should sink deeply into one way, not becoming narrow-minded, but rather in order to achieve that one-pointedness of concentration, which alone makes depth in meditation and inner awareness possible. For this reason, and Swami is explaining here, initiation, when one takes it, is more than simply learning a technique. It is embracing the path of discipleship to a guru, or, as in our case, a line of gurus. What Swami is addressing here, and this is something that in Autobiography of a Yogi, I always look back to see if the book is here, in Autobiography of a Yogi, Master talks about the incredible power of Kriya as a way to draw closer to God, to realize God. So people reading that have this thought in their mind that if I could get the technique of Kriya, then I could make this enormous spiritual progress. So Swami often has to balance that. Everything that Master says is true, but to really make it clear, this is embracing a path of discipleship to a guru and to a whole line of gurus. So there has to be some understanding of what you're doing, because it isn't just, oh, I'll just learn this technique and it'll be like an exercise routine or something. There has to be this whole other level of involvement. So he says, I would want you to know more about our path and our Guru's teachings before you take the step of Kriya initiation. For you to take Kriya now would not be fair to you. You would not get results and would soon stop your practice in disappointment. People often ask, well, if Master wants Kriya, everyone to have Kriya, if it's so powerful, why would you hold it back? And this is what he says. If you practice it without a full understanding of what you're getting into, without an appreciation of discipleship, you won't get the results. And then you'll quit in disappointment. So it's to protect people that a sufficient barrier is put in front of the possibility of getting initiation, that you have to actually have some background and some capacity to use the technique. There are other lines where they make Kriya easier to get, but this is the way Master did it. And this is the way Swami felt it was only appropriate, because otherwise you can't practice it. You have to have you have to have some understanding of inner awareness, and you have to have a regular practice in which to fit the Kriya, or else you won't be able to do it. So then Swami now addresses the man. So teach her the Hong Sa technique. He gives the Kriya Bond permission, and tell her how she can take the lessons, and help her in any other way that you can. So glad to see you wanting to help her with your spiritual knowledge, and I am so glad for you, addressing the woman, that you are responding so well. For truly the only important thing in life is to know our own selves, the God within us. So I think this letter was included so that people wouldn't misunderstand. So that those who have Kriya and it's helping me so much, I'm just going to teach it to everyone I know. Swami just wanted to put some clarity on that issue. And the compiler of these lessons thought it was an important point. So this is about 1975. He responds to a devotee's account of difficulties they're having while doing Kriya Yoga. Swami says, I would be interested to know how many Kriyas you were doing when you experienced so much difficulty. Awakening of Kundalini is the path to enlightenment, not a horrendous experience. However, the awakening of forces for which one is not ready can be bad. Therefore, I would like to know what exactly you were doing. Now, there is a sort of a common vocabulary where people talk about these Kundalini awakenings experiences, and I know that such things do happen. It is possible to put out energy and sort of use the wrong kind of willpower to create Kundalini experiences that the body hasn't been prepared for. I also know that people banty about the word Kundalini experiences a lot these days. And so not everything that people call a Kundalini experience is exactly that. So it's a little hard to tell. That's why Swami asked, what were you doing? Were you overdoing it? Were you pushing too hard? So Swami says, I remember your intensity, and that there was a great deal of tension involved also in that intensity. I believe your greatest difficulty lay in this attitude rather than in your practices. So that's what Swami's trying to say. I don't think the Kriya is really causing this experience. I think that you're going at your practices with way too much tension. People use willpower and think the more willpower I use, but tense willpower is not the right kind of willpower. Then Swami says, nonetheless, I have always been impressed and touched by your sincerity, and would like to see you come out of what I consider to be a misunderstanding of an important point on the path, which is that there is such a thing as too much egoic self-will. And more is not better if more is just increasing the pressure and the tension in what you're doing. Kriya is an art, not just a science. And an art has to be practiced with sensitivity, and people of willpower don't always know that. They get a little confused. Swami says, I am, however, very pleased that you are still following the path earnestly. So here's another. This is 1993. Self-described psychically sensitive woman asked why her body shook during meditation. Swami writes, here are a few suggestions. As much as possible, don't talk to others about this experience. Keep it very private and try not to let others observe it. I think what he's saying is he doesn't want it to become a bigger and bigger deal in this person's mind. Sometimes people, we do things that make us stand out and make us feel special. And if someone thinks of themselves as psychically sensitive, a person may not mind having a little evidence of that claim. I have no idea who this letter is, so I really have no idea if any of that applies. But sometimes, we don't mind saying that we're very, very sensitive and these things happen to us. So Swami is wanting to take away any possibility that this will start building up an egoic self-definition that will not be helpful. Don't talk to people. Keep this very private. Don't let people see you. Be completely relaxed physically. to lessen the expression of this experience through your body. Try to expand your awareness and to feel that the experience is taking place beyond the confines of your body. And that's a very interesting point. You know, sometimes energy begins to swirl, and it's because we're trying to control it too much physically. Swami just says, let it go. Just relax. Instead of sort of tensing against it, just relax and feel like it's happening, as he says, beyond the confines, which the energy is just moving around you rather than in you. Don't take it too seriously either. These things happen on the path. Keep your concentration at the point between the eyebrows more than in the heart. Live more in your aura, less in the body. Accept that soul consciousness is different from body consciousness, and don't be afraid. The reason he's having the woman move her attention from the heart to the spiritual eye is so that emotional responses don't build up. When the energy is in the heart, it can always be pulled down into the lower chakras. It's more secure when it's at the spiritual eye. That's how Master teaches. More secure in the sense of more consistently upward moving. And don't take it too seriously. Swami's not being rude, but sometimes people who are inexperienced in meditation are very impressed by the things that happen, and we imagine them to be more important than they are. And don't be afraid. I remember when I had some very small experience in meditation, but I didn't know that I was frightened of it, but the unfamiliarity of it made me uneasy. And I told Swami about it, and he said, don't be afraid. And I said, I'm not afraid. And I thought, if you're not afraid, why has your voice gone up all those levels? And I realized that I really was afraid. And the fear was making me very tense, and I was just making too much of it. So often when people bring to me experiences that are not life-threatening, that are not dangerous, I just say these things happen. I mean, because that's how Swami responded. These things happen. You're beginning to, you're interiorizing energy when we're used to being outward. We're intensifying it with our spiritual practices. And we're full of conflicting attitudes, emotions, and physical conditions. And so energy starts moving and it hits a few potholes. But it isn't most of the time. It's not significant. And most of the time, if we just relax and don't say, oh no, it's happening again, it's happening again. Instead of it's just, or, oh, it's happening again. It's just more like, it's just happening. Things happen. The way Swami puts it, live more in your aura, less in your body. Live in the flow of energy. Accept that soul consciousness is different from body consciousness. And don't be afraid. Soul consciousness is different. It's not going to feel exactly the same to expand as it feels to remain contracted. And trust Master. Just trust him. So as not to be so sensitive to other people's vibrations, because here's the question, I'm psychically sensitive. So as not to be so sensitive to other people's vibrations, direct your energy into giving rather than a receiving mode. Pray for them secretly. Mentally bless them so that you act as a channel for the divine energy. Forgive me if I say the word psychically sensitive, if I'm putting a little edge on it. I'm actually talking to myself because I believe now you have to forgive me because I'm doing a lot of recording and I'm not sure which series of classes include which information. But I had to go through a whole long cycle where I am sensitive, and I don't know exactly what the right words are. It may be just that I'm very observant, but I tend to be quite aware of what's going on around me, and what's going on with other people. I'm just very aware of what's going on, and I for a long time I used that as a reason why I was weak. I used it as a reason why I had to be very self-protective and why I had to be very self-concerned. Because after all, I'm so sensitive. And one day it crossed my mind when I was sitting next to a man who was here for many years. He was a big, strong devotee, and We were doing a class together on affirmations, and he started doing the affirmations. I am bold, I am strong, I am courageous, I am fearless, I am powerful. And I thought, never in my life have I ever said an affirmation like that. And we were doing this class together, so I had to say it with him. And then it just crossed my mind, why have I never said that? Why have I never affirmed that kind of power? He was a big man, and that's how he naturally thought. But I thought, because I'm always affirming that I'm weak, I'm small, I'm delicate, I'm sensitive. And I thought, I really have this completely backwards. Of course, it's good to be sensitive. I mean, I find it very helpful in the life that I lead, to be aware of what's going on around me, and to be aware of what other people are thinking sometimes and feeling. It just makes me more responsive. It's very helpful. But to use it as an excuse for constant self-concern, which to a very large extent I have to say that I was. I just had it backwards. If I'm so sensitive and so spiritually aware, it should make me absolutely invulnerable. I should be able to be so powerful that nothing touches me. I mean, what I really want to be aware of is God's presence within. And if I'm aware of other people's realities, why would that pull me down? Why would it not just lift me up and be able to be helpful to them? It was quite startling to me to realize that I had it completely wrong. And so what Swami says here, if you want to be less vulnerable, what does he use? So as not to be so sensitive to other people's vibrations. So what undoubtedly was part of this is that, I can't be around this person, I can't be around that one, I can't be in this atmosphere, I can't be in that atmosphere because their vibrations affect me so much. Why would they affect you so much? Yes, you may receive them, but what we need to create, and again I'm talking to myself, which is the strength here, we need to create a powerful, dynamic, positive magnetism. And of course, the whole point here is, am I thinking about myself, or am I thinking about helping others? So Swami just says, direct your energy into a giving rather than a receiving mode. If there's someone near whose vibrations are incompatible with yours, then send them positive vibrations. Send them the light of the divine. Not only does it switch, well, first of all, it takes you off of thinking about yourself, which is never expansive. It turns you into being serviceful, which is always expansive and will therefore inherently strengthen you when you think about giving instead of what you're getting. And then it will also make you a channel for divine energy, which is what we're trying to be sensitive to. We're trying to be sensitive to Divine Mother. How can I help? How can I be of service? How can I be your instrument? Now, I'm not denigrating the fact that, some of us are just, more tightly strung. That's how that's sort of the phrase I've used for myself. I'm a little tightly strung. And I've really had the idea at times, I'm looking at my hands, that, that I have one layer less of skin that other people have. But I have to say with great strength, when I changed my attitude toward all of that, my experience of life began to change radically as well. And it's primarily what Swami says here. How can I give? Not thinking all the time, what are people doing to me by merely existing in proximity to me? How can I help them? And why do I have to be afraid? I'm the disciple of a great master. Divine Mother is with me. I don't have to be afraid about somebody's energy. Yes, of course, there are really powerful, bad people in the world that I don't want to be close to. And naturally, I have an affinity for some people more than others, and I certainly have an affinity for devotees over people whose minds are very worldly. But why should I be afraid? If I should be afraid, let me be afraid. But in general principle, why should I be afraid? I just start asking myself that question. Why should I be afraid? Why don't I turn this? And that's exactly what Swami is suggesting. It is natural that you should be more conscious than ordinarily at this time of the inner battle between light and darkness, which we all must fight. I'm not sure what Swami is referring to, but she must have written, I say she. Yes, her. Why, she must be going through some kind of a difficult time. That must be part of it. So, it is natural that you should be more conscious than ordinarily at this time of the inner battle between light and darkness, which we all must fight. It is natural. Maybe because what she was saying about what's going on in her body. Ask why her body, maybe she's going through some particular change. So it's natural that you should be more conscious than usual of the forces of light and darkness around you and the battle we all must fight. But don't let the battle become stressful. For in the stress you may find yourself pulled down, or alternatively find that the experience goes to your ego. Surrender yourself to God and Guru and let them guide you. Be relaxed and have faith. So she must have described some bigger experience of the forces of light and dark raging. So he says two things. It'll either pull you down or make you egoic. That's why he said, don't talk to anyone about this. Don't make this into a big ego experience. So much happens on the spiritual path. I mean, I remember when I asked Swami that, and years later I thought, it was so big to me and it was so small in the great scheme of things. Well, yeah, it is big to us because it's happening to us. But, soul consciousness is different than body consciousness. There's very good points here. So we just kind of shrug. These things happen. It'll get worked out. So now Swami says, this is 1998. A person with mentally demanding work asks how to quiet the mind for meditation. Oh, well, that's a very good question that we all ask, isn't it? If you're very, very active mentally when you sit down to meditate, often it's just an opportunity to keep on thinking. I think you'll find my book, Awaken to Superconsciousness, helpful. It's got plenty of food for thought and experimentation. See how you feel. See what you feel drawn to. That is a very, very good book if you haven't looked at it. Awaken to Superconsciousness. He goes step by step and he has all these different ways that you can start expanding your awareness and specific things you can do and lots of different exercises. So it's a very good suggestion if you just want to deepen your sadhana and energize your sadhana, sort of freshen up what you're doing a little bit. One thought does come to me. Have you done much chanting? One of the challenges of being so mentally so mentally involving a profession as yours is that when it comes time to meditate, it's hard to shut off the flow of words which continue to flood the brain. So specifically, I don't know whether he's a lawyer or a teacher or what he might be, but it's hard to cut off the flow of words which continue to flood the brain. That just about sums it up. If your work is to constantly articulate, then the habit of having whatever experience translate itself into words, I speak from experience, is difficult to shut off. I've found chanting to be very helpful in quieting and interiorizing the mind. It's not so easy to have a conversation and sing a song at the same time. A mental conversation, one just precludes the other because you've got melody, but you also have words. So when you have some words, you usually can't have other words at the same time. And so your word inclination is being shifted over into the mantras or the affirmations or the poetry of whatever the chanting is. I speak from experience. I know this works. Swami says, I just put out a CD of some chants of Yogananda that I recorded, which you might find helpful. There are, of course, many other such recordings available from us and from others as well. If you're not that good at the music yourself or don't feel that you can generate enough power on your own, putting on a chant recording of Swamiji, or now, this was 1998, now Ananda has many different chant recordings, and singing along with it. It's okay to listen silently, but if you don't sing yourself, your mind can keep going. And you'll just be listening to the music, but you'll still be having other words. It's when you replace those words with your own voice. You don't have to sing well, you don't have to sing loudly. It's been very interesting in this. This is being recorded in November 2020. And because we have to wear these masks a lot because of the virus thing that we're dealing with. And even though some of us are able to be in our temple now, we've been closed for months, but I've been often the leading of some of the events there, and I don't always have to wear a mask when I've been leading, but we're not singing out very loudly. But I found that I can sing essentially inaudibly, but with complete concentration, and it's actually been quite remarkable to realize how deeply you can go without making very much sound. Just it's like barely above a whisper, but it's not low energy. It's just full concentration, and it takes the other words out of your head. And if your difficulty in meditation is that the word flow doesn't stop, chanting, the words of the chanting fill the space that the mind would do, and the melody moves the energy, just lifts the energy out of the mental plane into a completely other place. Master said that chanting is half the battle for concentration, and it can't be overstated how tremendously helpful it is. Swami says, music among all the arts affects us in a particularly powerful way, as it is a direct manifestation of the Om vibration. I mean, we have a whole meditation technique for communing with the Om, and so chanting moves us half the distance, because the chants that Swami wrote, that Master wrote, their voices singing them or us singing along with them, is closer to the Om. That's the only way I can put it. I mean, there's lots of music. All music comes from the Om, of course, but some is closer to the source. Music can move you, but it doesn't necessarily move you inward. Sometimes it moves you outward. I'll finish what he wrote in just a minute. I had a very interesting experience with this. Because I lived at Ananda village and lived a very secluded life for many, many, many years, in the early 80s, I began to travel a little bit and teach a little bit more, but I missed years and years of popular culture. And I never regretted it, but I just did. So in some context or another, during my absence from society, since 1987, I've lived in Silicon Valley and have been a lot more in touch. Plus, communication systems are different. In my early years at Ananda Village, of course, there was no internet or email or anything like that. We had no electricity. So there was just no connection to the world. Now, even Ananda Village, of course, there's electricity, but the internet makes everything in one place. This is the good news, this is the bad news. But in any case, I went traveling in the mid-'80s and teaching. I started traveling and lecturing. And I'd never heard Barbra Streisand. She was very, very popular at that time. I knew her name, but I'd never heard her sing. So I was visiting somewhere, and they took me to see the movie Yentl, which she plays it's a story, a Jewish story set maybe in the early 1900s and somewhere in Eastern Europe. And this woman, who's Barbra Streisand in the movie, desperately wants to study her own Jewish religion, but women aren't allowed to study, so she masquerades as a man. And that's the whole story. She gets herself quite embroiled and actually even engaged and conceivably even married, if I'm not mistaken, you know, all the time hiding the fact that she's female instead of male. It's quite an entertaining movie. Barbra Streisand is a remarkable singer, just extraordinarily powerful. You probably all know that. Although maybe her star is already crested, and some of the younger ones of you don't know it. But the point being, here's the point. She sang exquisitely. The music was very good for what it was. And it just stirred the heart. I mean, this is, first of all, it's a very emotional story of human love, and it's in a Jewish context, which is also very, very very emotional. And then you have this woman singing magnificently. So it was like I thought of it like I felt like I was a big mixing bowl, and her voice was this giant wooden spoon, and it was just stirring around in my heart, just stirring around and moving everything. I did a lot of cooking, and so I know what batter is with a big spoon. And her spoon would just go in my heart and stir it around, and then it would just sort of pull my energy out in yearning and longing like this. But then it would just drop my feelings on the sidewalk because it was all just the human experience without any actual resolution. And it really made me conscious of the music that we had at Ananda, the music Swami had written, the chants of Master and that Swamiji that we would sing, because they would stir the heart. They do stir the heart, although not quite so dramatically, but they would still stir the heart. But the energy would spiral up the spine. And the more you would sing, the more you would feel in touch with a higher reality, instead of just drawn out at what I would call a horizontal level. When I would teach the chakras classes, which I actually taught a series recently, but I used to teach that series really often, people would talk about the chakras being blocked, which in a sense they are if you think of the Kundalini rising and it's not able to rise because the chakras are blocked. But the other thing that happens with the chakras, and this is just my way of saying it, is that the intention of each chakra is that each represents an essential element that has to be, that all have to work together to allow us to live successfully in this world in an upward moving way. But each chakra also, so each chakra has a way of turning its energy upward, raising its energy up to the spiritual eye, and then allowing our divine consciousness to guide that energy in such a way as to elevate us. But each chakra also has a vibration which I call the horizontal vibration, which is rather than the vibration moving upward and being guided by the spiritual eye, it simply reaches out to the world on its own level for fulfillment. And the heart wants emotional love. It wants to be recognized. It wants somebody to comfort me. It wants somebody to take care of me. It wants somebody else to tell me that I'm okay because they love me. And those are perfectly natural things for people to want. But also, if it all just goes out in that kind of longing, it does not lead to the kind of fulfillment that we're seeking. But if that deep desire to love and be loved is turned upward and is raised to the spiritual eye and then can be guided by a higher wisdom and not just by a human compulsion, then the fulfillment that we seek can come to us. And it doesn't have to come through renunciation. We may have all that human experience that we long for, but if it's guided with spiritual wisdom rather than compelled from helpless longing. And so what I felt in that movie was that I was just compelled in helpless longing. And then Barbra Streisand was not a guru. The story was not the Mahabharata. There was no great resolution. She just eventually, as I recall, leaves for the New World and stands on a boat. So this must be the 1800s, not the 1900s. She stands on a boat singing. But it was just like, I'm all, I need something now, and it was not going to be delivered. So I just walked out feeling stirred up and unsatisfied. Whereas when we chant, when we listen or sing Swamiji's music, or music the equivalent of which there isn't unfortunately a lot, it deeply moves the heart, but then the energy ends up at the spiritual eye. Because it's not emotional in that sense. It's not compelling us to reach out to the world for fulfillment. It's awakening us to the potential for higher fulfillment. So anyway, that's my little testimonial for the power of chanting. Music among all the arts affects us in a particularly powerful way, as it is a direct manifestation of the Om vibration. That's why when it's well done, as it was done in that movie by that singer, it affects us particularly deeply. That's what made her so incredibly popular, is that she could really take that music and just make it so powerful, but it was not a vibration I wanted. That's how I would put it. A painting, by contrast, communicates only via reflected light to the viewer. Music is effective not only in quieting the mind, but also in filling one with a devotional hunger to go deep in meditation, setting all other thoughts resolutely aside. Without that heartfelt yearning, deep meditation just isn't possible. Chanting helps greatly to awaken devotion, and so also can other kinds of uplifted music. So that without that heartfelt devotion, you know that our energy goes where we want it to go. That's basically what it is. You know, where your heart is, there your treasure is. Is that how they put it? Maybe I said that backwards. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart goes. What's important to you, you long for. And so chanting also reminds us that what's important to us is attunement with God. So then when we sit to meditate, we're hungry for it. Whereas if we just sit to meditate after a long day of the mind being focused on the things it has to accomplish, it's very hard to pull it away. So Swami says, I've just put out another album called Some of My Favorites. With the title like that, how could I not recommend it to you? The title of that may have been changed by now, I'm not certain. But it's beautiful CD of Swami himself singing many of his own songs. Because we have so many singers now, sometimes people have lost track of the way Swami himself sings this music, which it's really, really worth listening to. Swami says, thank you for writing. If I can be of any further help to you with your meditation or otherwise, please do let me know. My blessings and best wishes to you. Swami was so accessible to people. He had secretaries and he had people help him, but he just felt it was his job to be there for people. And I remember when I worked as his secretary, which was in the early 70s, and I was protective of him. Let me phrase it differently. You know, my first concern was for him always, and so I didn't just sort of open the door and let anybody come in. I'm still not saying this correctly. You know, Swami and I worked together when he was trying to write a book or something like that. People just couldn't come over and knock on his door. And so he was writing the path during most of the time I worked for him. And so it was understood that if you wanted to see Swami Kriyananda, you spoke first to his secretary, which at that time was me. And so I would arrange his appointments and, you know, confer with him about how much time he had and how, you know, who he could see and so on. And he was protective of his time because he was really trying to get this book done. And even though he was there to help people, it was more important for him to concentrate on the book. But I often carried it, he felt, a little too far, and I wasn't as sensitive as I should have been. And I remember him saying to me, he said, you must never give people the impression that my convenience, his convenience, is more important than their well-being. Which it was just put exactly right. You must never give people the impression that my convenience is more important than their well-being. He said, now sometimes, he says, you know, what they're asking is, we simply can't do it because it's not appropriate or it's not possible. He said, but people should always feel, because it's the truth, that you would be happy to do it for them if you could. And I mean, I really took that to heart, and I really worked hard to develop. And as he said to me, you're representing me, so you must treat people the way I would treat them. So I really developed the patience and the focus. You know, when people would come to me and wanted to see Swami Kriyananda, it was always extremely important to them. And I needed to stop everything I was doing. I needed to give people my complete attention, because that's what Swami would do. And I needed to listen very carefully as to what they needed or what they wanted. In other words, I had to treat them as Swami would treat them. So here it is, you know, thank you for writing. If I can be of any further help to you with your meditation or anything else, do please let me know. I mean, Swami, he wasn't just saying that. That wasn't like a stock ending to all his letters. It was just his genuine reaching out to whoever this person was. Everyone mattered to him. So, the next one is evolve in a relaxed way. Have you noticed how often the word relaxation has already appeared in this? This is the yogic techniques, and he's constantly reminding us to relax. Just relax. Okay. This was very early, again, November of 73. Swami writes, the difficulties that you describe are the result not of the techniques themselves, but of the vigor with which you have been going at them. As Master said, one mustn't try too hard, but evolve in a relaxed way, naturally and gradually. We have to come back to an image that has always been very helpful to me, which is when an apple seed is growing into an apple tree. You can't speed that process just by urging the apple seed to get on with the job. It just has to grow. A child who's 4 cannot become 6 in less than 2 years. I mean, no matter how much you want that child to become 6, it's going to take 24 months for that child to become 6. And we don't, much more than we realize, our spiritual development is like the seed growing into the apple tree. It's developing inside, and it's an expansion from the inside. And so often when we have these techniques, we use our willpower, and we think if we do more and more of what we're doing and with more and more intensity, but it's actually, it's an imposing on it from the outside. What we really want is we want it to expand from the inside. This is where tension itself is the opposite of expansion in many ways. You know, we have to be relaxed to be able to expand. We have to be elastic. So it's a fine line, because we need willpower, but we have to use the willpower in the right way. So Swami also says, devotion is a very, very important counterbalance to the mental effort put forth in Raja Yoga. He doesn't belabor the point. Perhaps he knows that whoever he's writing to would not be receptive, or maybe he just needs to remind them. Spiritual growth is not something you set your mind on and make happen. It's a divine love and a relationship with God that grows naturally from the heart. And that's what we're working with. This person asked about the Hring Kling mantra, Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha. Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha. It's a mantra to dissolve obstacles. And when something is in your way, Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha. I'm not pronouncing it as beautifully as Swami does, but the Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha, it has a certain sound to it, and it has literally the capacity to change the material world. Swamiji taught it to us at some point. He didn't teach us many things like that, but he taught it to us and suggested we do it when we have obstacles to overcome. When we were engaged in, when Ananda was sued and we had all those legal problems, there was a period of time when we would, after our weekly kirtans here, a group of us would sit together with a 108 mala, and we'd do Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha. We do it, I think we did it more than 108, but we do it at least 108 times, just to dissolve the obstacles that were being put in front of us by the litigation. And then Swami later put a melody to it, and he refers to that. The Hring Kling mantra is a bij mantra, which is to say it is a mantra of power rather than meaning. Hring vibrates with the heart. Kling is to destroy its impurities. You could give it a loose translation. Destroying my heart's impurities, I prostrate myself at the feet of the Lord. Although Swami has had us use that mantra for also for dissolving external obstacles. So I can't really, Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha. It hasn't just been to change myself, even though that's how he said it. However, all external change begins with self-transformation. So maybe if we get rid of the impurities of the heart, then everything else follows. I've been engaged in a very difficult situation, external situation, involving a lot of other people. And one of the ways that I've worked with that situation is to work very hard on purifying myself, because whatever karma has brought this challenging situation to me, I want to learn the lesson as fast as I can, or learn the lesson as completely as I can. Speed is incidental, but as thoroughly and as completely as possible, because if I can overcome whatever limitations it's trying to teach me, then of course that will be the way not only to facilitate the external resolution, but to free myself from further entanglement in matters such as this. So Om Hring Kling Krishnaya Namaha, to burn up all impurities of the heart, would probably have the same effect. Properly speaking, one does not chant Bij mantras, chant meaning sing. One speaks them. I wrote a melody because I wanted to sing it, but I know it was unorthodox of me to do so. And that's just sort of every so often we do something in the context of the path that isn't necessarily authorized. Every so often when I say something, I'll tell you that this is the gospel according to Asha, because I want you to know that I just made this up. And it makes sense to me, but I don't want you to go around thinking that this is actually Master's path. This is just some little, little sideline that I figured out that may or may not be true. So, moving right along, on using hypnosis to induce spiritual experiences. Oh my, 1980. I'm not sure I can answer your question satisfactorily, though I will try. There is on the spiritual path a whole world to be gone through before reaching superconsciousness. I mean, the world of the subconscious. It is possible to go straight through it to the superconscious level, but many people see, quote, visions and experience a great variety of phenomena that are imaginary rather than real. And much spiritual literature is devoted to helping people to learn how to tell the difference. Ooh, wowie zowie. That's a really important point. This is very hard for people, because when we begin to have unusual experiences, there's a natural desire to want to believe them. And Swami uses that phrase, you have to go through the subconscious to get to the superconscious. Let me think for a minute what he might be trying to say here. I think what he's trying to say is we have to purify our consciousness. We have to dissolve our vrittis. We can't get to superconsciousness just by wanting to get to superconsciousness. The subconscious is this enormous collective force of magnetic habit that holds us back from superconsciousness. So we can't just discard it. We have to actually resolve it, get through it. Now this is why meditation, especially Kriya, is so powerful, because it generates sufficient magnetic flow that the vrittis of subconscious habit and subconscious thought forms are automatically dissolved and drawn up into a higher level. It's the picture of the river flowing forcefully toward the ocean, and then the whirlpools of water that are developed, that as the river begins to increase and increase, the whirlpools will automatically be swept into the river. So the subconscious is full of vrittis. I mean, the subconscious is the repository of everything we have done up until now. Every incarnation, every experience, every fulfillment, every disappointment. I mean, the subconscious, it is the vrittis and the chakras. I mean, these words sort of are trying to indicate what we're talking about. And those vrittis have to be resolved. So you have to go, I think that's what he means, by going through the subconscious. It doesn't mean that you go to sleep and then after you've slept for 15 years, then you suddenly start to meditate. He's not talking about subconscious in terms of sleep. He's talking about unresolved, stored karma. That we have to go through that unresolved, stored karma and liberate it. Resolve it, liberate it, overcome it, dissolve it, whatever it is, one way or another, release it, that's the word I want. Has to be resolved and released somehow in order for us to be free for superconsciousness. Swami made a comment once, he just said it. He commented one day essentially that he was exactly the same asleep as awake. And he didn't mean, what he meant was that there were no qualities that came out when he was asleep that were not exactly the same as the qualities he had when he was awake. And in another context, he commented that basically what he said is, let me see how to say it. Essentially what he said is he had no subconscious. And what he meant by that was that there was nothing below the surface that was unresolved. And I tried to put that in a book, I think, and he wouldn't let me. But that is what he said to me. And that was, he had a photograph taken of his aura, and it was just this completely indigo blue color. And the woman who did aura photographs, this happened to be in Australia, but she said she'd never, thousands of photographs, she'd never seen anything like it. Swami's comment later was because there was no subconscious. It was just all superconscious energy. Then he withdrew that because he didn't like to say those sorts of things about himself. I mean, he didn't think it was appropriate to say those things about himself. And he also just, he preferred to, I'll quote him, Swami said, "I always thought I could do more good as a simple, unaffected friend to people than in any other role." He never made a point of who he was. He thought it was unfair advantage, and he didn't see how it would help anyone for him to say that. If you could intuit who he was, he didn't dispute you, but he wouldn't impose it on us. So anyway, I mean, the world, it is possible to go straight through it to the superconscious level. So, but many people see visions and experiences. In other words, we're trying to go to superconsciousness, but we get sucked into the vridis of the subconscious instead of just passing through. And so he says, you know, much spiritual literature is devoted to helping people learn how to tell the difference between what is a subconscious experience and what is a superconscious experience. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is a very condensed summary of the stages of the progress of the nature of spiritual progress, one of the serious obstacles is false visions. So it's like it's not a small thing that we just get drawn into these subconscious worlds and we don't realize that they're subconscious. And so now Swami goes on to talk about it. For example, a person will see Jesus Christ in meditation. How is he to know whether Jesus has actually come to him or whether he only imagined the visit? The imagination can be very keen. So we're meditating, we have a feeling that Jesus is there, we're having an experience of Jesus. But is it really Jesus? Or am I just very expansive in my capacity to visualize? In my book, The Path, you may recall, if you have read it, the story of the man who told Master that he experienced cosmic consciousness. But Master proved to him that it was only his highly developed powers of visualization that had led him to think so. That story in The Path was particularly touching because the man was in no way trying to be pretentious. He wasn't like coming in, showing off or anything like that. But he just genuinely thought he was able, in this case, to see things at a distance. And what Master did with him in that story is the man claimed he was clairvoyant, that he could see things at a distance. So they were in a hotel and they sat in the dining room, in the bedroom, the hotel room, and then the man went into his superconscious state and Master had him describe the dining room downstairs. So the man described the dining room downstairs just perfectly sincerely, but then they walked downstairs and it wasn't what he said. It just wasn't. He had just imagined it. And the man was quite startled and quite humbled by the experience, because he didn't know he was deceiving himself. That's why Patanjali says that false visions are a very serious issue on the spiritual path, because even people who are very sincere can get drawn into it. So this man had the karma to be there with Master. So having realized his error, Master, I suppose, began to work with him as to extricate himself, because he was lost in the subconscious. And you don't think that subconscious is stupid. It's very smart. So how can one tell the difference? I won't go into the subject in depth here. It's long and involved. But the most important point of all is the effect it has. One who has really seen Jesus Christ in meditation will be changed by the experience, and changed much more dramatically than he would be by the slight changes that can be affected by the imagination alone. I had a very unfortunate experience a number of years ago. I don't think I handled this well. Maybe there was no good way to handle it. There was a man who was with us for a short period of time. He actually left after this experience, so I actually felt very guilty about it and did my best to, what do you say, to bridge the gap, but I never succeeded. He just believed that he was having superconscious experiences. He believed that he was going into cosmic consciousness. And it was quite clear that he wasn't. That's the only thing I can say. It was quite clearly a case of subconscious experiences. So I tried to reason with him as to why they weren't superconscious, just by bringing up the evidence of the way his life was continuing, even though he was supposed to be in that state of consciousness. But it was too brutal. I really don't know what else I could have done. At the time, I prayed about it. I thought very deeply. And it was like, do I let him continue in what was, and I'll just have to say, I don't believe I was mistaken. Do I let him continue in what I know is an absolute delusion that is beginning to define his life? He's beginning to think that he's this highly evolved samadhi experiencing spiritual person, and he isn't. He's just a good man trying to be a devotee, but he's fallen into Patanjali's trap. So do I just let it go, or do I make some effort to intervene? So I made an effort to intervene, and what happened was he simply absolutely cut me out of his life and would barely speak to me, and soon after simply separated himself from Ananda. It did not end well. I was sincere, but I apparently was wrong, or he was. I don't know what to do. But it is, when Swami just says that, there are obvious signs that the change in you will be much more dramatic than if, I dreamt about Jesus and I meditate again and Jesus was there. But you can just see that your life is really just essentially going on, that you haven't really become someone else. When you have true visions, when the Virgin Mary visits you and you have an apparition of Mary, even if your life didn't appear to be that out of the ordinary, you become different. The masters don't just drop in on us like that. It takes great spiritual magnitude to really be able to have visions of the masters like that. Now, we can conjure them and we can dream about them and we can visualize them, but that's quite different than an actual visitation. I do not believe that superconscious experiences can be induced by hypnotic suggestion. Superconscious, because that was her question, whether hypnosis will help. So he's giving all this explanation of subconsciousness and the danger of false visions, and then goes to answer her question. I do not believe that superconscious experiences can be induced by hypnotic suggestion. Superconscious realities exist on a higher level. They act upon the conscious and subconscious. They are not acted upon by these lower states. So superconsciousness influences our conscious and subconscious experience, but we can't from a subconscious or a conscious level dictate to the superconscious. So we can't just say, I will have a vision of Jesus. But the superconscious can say, thou shalt have a vision of Jesus, and thou shalt have a vision of Jesus. But it doesn't come on commandment unless we're in a superconscious state, but then you don't have to ask the questions. It's a bit like when Mozart asked when another composer asked Mozart how to write a symphony. Mozart said to him, well, you begin first with, single line, and then you can write duets, and then quartets or whatever, and then you can work your way to a symphony. And the would-be composer said to Mozart, but that's not what you did. You wrote symphonies right away. And Mozart said, but I didn't have to ask anyone how to do it. So that's sort of what we're working with here. I do not believe that superconscious experiences can be induced by hypnosis. This is not to say that imagined experiences are wrong or harmful. That's sort of what I was saying. You can daydream about being with Jesus. You can imagine that you're walking in Jerusalem. You can feel yourself at the base of the cross and what you would do. You can be on the Sea of Galilee and imagine Jesus walking across the water. I mean, such things are wonderful. It's like writing poetry. You're writing poetry in your mind. You're thinking of something beautiful and you're creating it, and merely by imagining it, you're living in it. But that's quite different than when he actually comes, and not that I know what it would be like when he actually comes. But you understand what I'm saying. This is not to say that imagined experiences are wrong or harmful. Master was not in favor of hypnosis, but I'm sure he would not have objected to getting someone to visualize the spiritual eye, etc. Such visualization can help to awaken the soul's memory of the deeper reality. That's a beautiful way to put it. In various places, Swami and Master have talked about how helpful visualization can be, because it can help to awaken the soul's memory of that deeper reality. I've said more, it puts you in tune with something that is actually there, and then the reality of it can enter you more deeply, because you've used your own willpower and your imagination to lift your consciousness to that level. That's when you deeply concentrate. We imagine that Master is with us all the time. I don't mean that we imagine it and it's only imaginary, but it's very helpful to feel as if Master is walking next to you. One of the suggestions for meditating is sit down and feel that you're sitting inside Master's body, and it's actually his spine through which your Kriya practice is going. Now, that's not untrue, but it's not actually true. Master hasn't really come to you, but you're imagining a reality. And it lifts your spirit closer to that reality. Such visualization can help to awaken the soul's memory. Nonetheless, the visualization should not be confused with that reality, and that's where the key is. We're visualizing it, we're deep into it, it's a wonderful experience, but we can't come out later and say, oh yes, I was walking with Jesus in Galilee and he was right next to me. Like St. Francis actually saw Jesus. St. Teresa of Avila would leave her guests who had come to visit her through the grill, and she would say, someone is waiting for me in my cell, I have to go back to my cell. And she would go back to her cell and Jesus would be waiting for her. And it wasn't imagination, he had materialized and had come to be with her. Christ materialized and Francis walked hand in hand with him. That's quite different. Yes, there are similarities between hypnosis and yogic trance, as in fact there are similarities between sleep or drunkenness and samadhi. But the seeker is wise to accept the warnings of the masters that these similarities are superficial and ought not to be explored by one who truly wants to awaken from the sleep of delusion. Now I need to say something about hypnosis here, because this is very important. When Master was talking about hypnosis, which he really did not approve of, it was the kind of hypnosis that you see in nightclub acts, where somebody puts someone into a trance. They are now under the influence of the person who hypnotized them, and at his suggestion they will do all kinds of things they would not normally do. Or he can say to them, there's a butterfly in the room, or you're chasing a baseball around, or You're going to cluck like a chicken, and then you'll sort of run around and cluck like a chicken, which you would never do under any circumstances. And they could also plant post-hypnotic suggestions to you so that, every time you hear the word red car, you're going to jump up and sing the national anthem. And people would actually do this. And there were entertaining, I've used the word in quotes, this was way people would do very interesting performances. Now, the power to hypnotize someone is quite a powerful force of will. The ability, the inclination to be hypnotized, not everyone can be hypnotized. So I don't know how a stage hypnotist would know, but anyway, I'm sure that they would learn and they would know how to do that. Now, Master said that is very unwholesome for you to, it's not wholesome for the hypnotist to put someone under their control like that, and it's not good for the person to allow themselves to be overcome by someone else's will. That's what Master meant by hypnosis. And it was the having your will subject to someone else's and being forced to do things that you would not do in your conscious state. Nowadays, there's a whole thing called hypnotherapy. And I am no expert, so I'm going to just give you my little bit of what I did know. As far as I've been able to tell, hypnotherapy is deep guided visualization. And the subject remains completely in control. There is not an imposition of will. To guide someone in a visualization is not to take over their mind. To allow yourself to be guided is different than allowing someone to take over your mind. Because I've had people consistently say, well, I met this counselor and they want to use hypnotherapy on me, but Master said hypnosis is not good. I said, ask them what they're actually going to do. Because every time I've ever asked anyone who was in a situation nowadays where they were using the word hypnosis, it wasn't. It wasn't what Master meant there. So pay attention, but don't get confused by vocabulary, because I think the word has changed its meaning. Now, people still do practice hypnosis of the kind that Master suggested. And there are cases where it can be useful for health. I mean, hypnosis sometimes people can use to avoid feeling pain when anesthesia is not an option or something like that. But Master, as a rule, spoke against it. So I wanted to make all that clear. Okay, this was in 1982, and the summary is, we can lose spiritual powers very easily. I think I'll probably only get partway through this. Swami says, first, let me tell you that I am praying deeply for you that you see this situation clearly. When one receives visions and voices such as you have experienced, it becomes very difficult to distinguish how real they are. I cannot tell just how real your own experiences have been, but I do have certain doubts concerning them. My strong advice to you is that you not give them too much attention. Now, I mean, that's pretty strong medicine from Swamiji. He always starts with the caveat, I can't be sure, but I'm inclined to think, and I strongly encourage you not to give them too much influence. I must confess, I've been in this position before. It's very tricky. Somebody comes to you and they're very sure that what they've experienced is genuine superconscious intuition. And quite honestly, who am I to say? It's just, if I'm not capable of entering into a superconscious state myself at will, how can I discern? But sometimes I feel uneasy. I told you about one very big situation. That was very, very big. But just, we all want to be guided, and we all need to be guided, and intuition is tricky. I mean, I said to Swami once, I was just sort of like, I just don't even want to deal with intuition, with helping people develop it or anything. And Swami said, you must, because we all have to develop intuition, and we all have to go through these misunderstandings. So what I would simply say, from being on both sides of it, be very humble about what you feel. And not that you need to be insecure about it, just be humble about it. I'm doing this because this is what I feel Master wants me to do. I'm quite open to hearing another perspective. And it doesn't mean that one just capitulates because other people have a different opinion. Give me reasons. Talk to me about it. Tell me what you're seeing. You know, again, I've referred to a difficult situation I'm in. It's very difficult, and I keep saying to Master, I'm doing the best I can to understand your will, but I'm not going to declare I know what Master's will is. What I'm saying is, as far as I can tell, this is how I'm being guided. You know, and I've had a few instances where I felt strongly guided, but I still say, as far as I can tell, this is what I'm being guided. Even because, you see, that kind of guidance itself is very, very sensitive. It's not the kind of thing where you can say, this is what is wanted, because that very act of declaring it with that kind of ego conviction in itself is contradictory to the very nature of guidance. And there's an experience that I've had more than one, but this was a very dramatic. I had a true intuition, I know it was true, but I became so egoic about it. This was like in the late 80s, it was a project, and we had to make some decisions, and I just knew what the right decision was. And other people were considering lots of other alternatives, and I felt like, you know, this was what we should do, which I have to say, eventually everybody came to it. But I became quite egoic about it. And being so egoic, it was not attractive, and people just began to reject my point of view just because I was so egotistical about it. I learned a lot from that. Swamiji never does that. He never did that. He never imposed on us his intuition. So finally I just resigned from the committee making the decision and just said, frankly, I may have had a true intuition, but I've muddied the water so much by the way I've handled it that I'm going to just step back. And implied in that, in my own self, was, if it was right, everyone will come to see it. And in fact, when everything calmed down, they came to the same conclusion that I had already come to. And I don't say that proudly because I messed it up. So Swami says to this man, it's very hard to tell, I can't say for certain, but I'm going to encourage you to be humble and less certain about this, because you're less likely to get yourself in trouble that way. And then you can experiment and learn, but if you haven't staked your ego out on being right, the chances are much better that you're going to be able to tell whether you're right or not. Once you not only have intuition, but you have ego certainty, then it gets even more difficult to tell what's happening. So we'll go on with this letter at our next session. So that will be our evening. God bless you.